Kmele, I saw you shaking your head. I mean, it really is up is down and down is up. But, what do you make of it?
Well, first, I want to second your perspective. I think she's uniquely bad at this job. We see a lot of people go into being like the White House press secretary and having to spin on behalf of their bosses, telling half-truths. She's just terrible at this. I think there have been dueling editorials in recent days in the New York Times, the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, both about COVID and educational policy. And the Wall Street Journal was blasting the teachers' unions for keeping the schools closed as long as they did. And the Washington Post editorial, and this is the entire editorial board, did not say in response, this is unfair because Republicans are responsible for this. What they said was, specifically, this is unfair because it doesn't take into account that there was a lot of fear and trepidation at the time. We know who was responsible for keeping the schools closed. This isn't debatable. There's some question about whether or not it was justified, whether or not it's understandable, but the fact that it's been consequential, that it's hurt students in general, and that it was almost certainly unnecessary, that is what we should be focusing on. This wasn't a function of money. One line that I do want to slag the Washington Post editorial writers for is suggesting at some point that it's not worth talking about whether or not teachers' unions are responsible, that we shouldn't be looking backwards. We should be looking forwards because we need to help students catch up. One, I would love to see them apply the same exact philosophy to kind of their conversations about systemic racism. They seem to be particularly obsessed with talking about what happened in the past and not what actually matters and is likely to improve people's lives in that context. But two, I think it's vitally important that we have conversations about what went wrong and what went right with respect to public health and pandemic policy. I think a lot of that is going to inform how we respond to other problems in the future, but may also have some sort of informative value with respect to the policy solutions that we select when we're trying to help kids get out of the rut and the hole that we've dug for them as a result of really disadvantageous policies that were adopted during the pandemic.
It's amazing how she's. Yeah, go ahead, Matt. Because I was just going to say she's mad that the Republicans didn't support the American Rescue Plan. Meanwhile, all these schools still have so much money sitting in the coffers that they didn't spend.
Unspent,
right? Yeah. So now she's trying to say this is how they got the schools reopened. It was Joe Biden. Meanwhile, he took office and he took possession of a vaccine. Trump did not have the vaccine, though he developed the vaccine. So to compare, just this is the percentage of schools that were open when we took office to, where we are today is so misleading. It doesn't add any context. If you go back and look at Trump, spring of 2020, he was saying we should open the schools and he was getting attacked uniformly by Democrats for being absolutely irresponsible. Go ahead, Matt.
So Ron DeSantis was called widely in the press Ron Death Santis, because he insisted that Florida public schools be fully open in the fall of 2020, just like basically almost every single school district in the entire continent of Europe. By the way, I guess we only pay attention to Europe when it's advantageous for ourselves. But he was called Ron Death Santis. If you look, and you can find this very easily online, there are color-coded state-by-state rankings on which states had the most open school days from beginning in 2020 in the fall onward, and which ones had the most closed. The most open, all of them are Republican. They voted Republican in the 2020 election. They have a governor who's Republican. Their state house is Republican. All the ones that were the most closed, all Democrats. The correlation between whether your school systems were open or closed was entirely about partisan politics. Entirely. And what do we know about partisan politics on the Democratic side? 94% of teachers' union giving goes to Democratic Party. Political giving goes to Democratic parties. So it's exactly in those places where they have the most power that they closed the most schools. And we have just seen, as mentioned of last week, these big report about what happened to learning loss over the last couple of years. It is those places. And if we're going to use an equity as a focus in all other circumstances, let's look at equity in this circumstances. The populations that got hit hardest were poor and minority, period, when it comes to this. I know Kmele doesn't like that because he doesn't believe in the word minority, but it's certainly among poor people.
Misrepresent my perspective, Matt Welch.
I'm just kidding. Traditionally disadvantaged communities suffer by far the most, and there's those places that are run by Democrats, and so it's worse than gaslighting, a term that I normally hate, but it is absolutely on point in this case.
Can I just say, sure. I started it by saying it's gaslighting along the lines of what they did with defund the police. And that policy pushed by Democrats had exactly the same effect. It endangered many communities and people lost their lives as a result of this, but in particular, Black and brown communities. So both of these policies, which were 100% pushed by Democrats, resulted in real losses to Black and brown communities across America. Hence, the 180 in positions being taken right now by the Democrats and the lie that they were always on the right side. Go ahead.
I first of all, I object to Ron DeSantis because it just doesn't really work. It's just a DE, like Ron DeSantis. But you remember those times, by the way, in which anybody that had the kind of slightly heterodox view on COVID, many of which turned out to be right, by the way. So heterodox at the time, were accused of confining grandma to the gas chamber, basically.
Yeah.
They're like everything that you're doing is going to make people die. So Matt brings up the politics. Well, let's look at the politics of this. Of course, we were told we should not politicize science. This is a smart thing to say, but it never actually happens. Well, if we look at the politicization of science and how it relates to schools, Matt is also correct that most all of Europe didn't close schools. Sweden, where I used to live, I don't think closed schools for a single day, right? They didn't even have lockdowns. So now is the time, after a couple of years of this, 2.5 years, to actually look at the evidence. If not, you are engaged in a political campaign. If you're up there as the White House press secretary talking about this stuff in these ways, why are you not, if you don't care about the politicization of science, you don't want it to happen, why are you not addressing the American people and saying, okay, so here's actually what we know about COVID in schools. What happened with kids? How many kids died? How many teachers were, confined to their deathbeds because of a transmission from a child? Because we have a lot of evidence about this now, but instead it's a political blame game and a political blame game only. I'm fine with that because there were some really bad and shitty politics that we all saw during this time. But I also want that adjunct point to say, by the way, you were all wrong about this. And, whether or not you like Ron DeSantis, want him to be president, or, hell, want him to even be in elected office in Florida, he was right. And Sweden was right. And Europe was right about this. In this idea that kids were going to be dropping like flies, and their teachers, of course, too, because they were vectors of disease, these kids, turned out what? Not to be true. And you can look at the evidence. I'm not just making this up, but the problem is no one wants to talk about the evidence. And no one at this point is going back and saying, what do we know about COVID? What do we know about who is dying from it? What do we know about transmission rates? Why are we still asking professional tennis players to come to America and have a vaccine when the vaccine doesn't prevent the damn thing from transmitting? And that's why we did it before.
And this is still affecting policy. This is still affecting policy. We saw it in D.C. where the mayor suggested that she was going to hold students out of school, not give them any options to attend unless they were fully vaccinated, when we know all of the things that you just underscored, Moynihan. This is the reason we have to talk about the profound failures that happened during the pandemic and our unseriousness about trusting the science.
But the thing is, Kmele, I am okay with the failures in some senses because there was a lot of stuff we didn't know, and we were feeling this through as a nation. Scientists are trying to figure it out. There's debate amongst scientists. There's no settled science. That's ridiculous. But when we're not actually correcting the record about this stuff and actually telling people, like, why on earth would we have a mandate for a vaccine of playing in a tennis tournament? You can't do this. Well, why? I mean, that's his problem, isn't it? It's not mine, because he can transmit it and he can acquire that whether or not he's been vaccinated. He's just going to have a much better time if he is.
That's the position all of our children are in. All of our children in that. My kids are facing vaccine mandates at both of their schools. And for what? For what? If, God forbid, they got some terribly severe case of COVID and had a very negative health outcome, that would be between me, my child, my husband, and our doctor, our pediatrician. That is not for the school to weigh in on. The school doesn't pay our hospital bills. The school really just needs to worry about transmission, and the vaccine doesn't affect that at all. And yet still, they're going to expel my children at age 16 unless they get the vaccine. That policy is still in place, and it's absolute madness. But to your point, they've been dishonest all along. The reason they won't do, a full, open, honest, retrospective look is because they've been dishonest all along. As we saw, the masking was driving me nuts, as you guys know. As we saw the CDC do studies, like the 90,000 kids in Atlanta that showed the masks did nothing, they ignored it. Then they would do another study, and then we'd have honest journalists come out and say, no, that one's flawed too. And they would continue touting the study despite serious methodological issues. And then a study would come out of Europe proving, no, the masks don't work in reducing transmission. And they would ignore it or try to discredit it. It was all agenda driven. So of course now, the one retrospective moment we're having at the CDC, Rochelle Walensky's going to take a look at what went wrong, is focusing on how we are too academic. We're just too smart. What we focused on was you had too many academic papers. Shut up, Rochelle. That's not it. Not it. You need to go the way of that Connecticut Coscob Elementary School teacher, vice principal, whatever he is. You need to go to the way of all these lunatics who won't accept reality. Well, as you know, we're in a recession, and the only way to combat it is to think smarter about how we shop. You're buying meat at the grocery store? You could be buying it so much better. Good Ranchers gives you access to the best meat America has to offer at a price that has not gone up, while all the others have skyrocketed. You don't have to get over your fear of commitment to subscribe with Good Ranchers. You can pause your subscription for up to 90 days, or you can cancel it entirely anytime you want. All right, so it's not really that much of a commitment. You can keep your benefits and your locked-in price without any long-term contracts. Go to goodranchers.com/Megyn, and you can subscribe there and lock in your price. That's smart. Plus, you'll get $30 off your first order, and you get free shipping. Good Ranchers was named the best food subscription earlier this year because they make getting America's best meat and seafood delivered to your door easy, affordable, and safe. Use that code, MEGYN, Megyn, today. Again, that's code Megyn, and get your box for $30 off and free shipping. The only thing you're going to love more than the prime steaks, better than organic chicken, and superior seafood of Good Ranchers is the price you get to pay for it forever. GoodRanchers.com/Megyn. Head on over, subscribe. Good Ranchers, American meat delivered. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.